the pessimistic, optimistic, and everyone in between. My name is Connor Philippine, and welcome back to the Minnesotan Sports Podcast. And at this point, we're getting into the end of the summer, and we are now less than 2 weeks away until the season starts. Even though I feel like I am pretty good on this channel about not letting the teams that I'm biased for or against affect the predictions that I make, honestly, the only thing sometimes I feel like I'm biased about is sometimes against the Vikings because I'm kind of one of the more pessimistic fans in terms of pessimistic, optimistic, and everyone in between, where the Vikings have disappointed me so much in the past that I feel like almost sometimes I make predictions that the Vikings are going to do more poorly than I think they will, just because I am expecting disappointment from this team. Other than that, I feel like I do a really good job of keeping those biases away. However, even with that all aside, I do feel like it's only fair for people to find out what my teams this year are that I'm going to be rooting for, teams that I want to win the most or the least. Some of these are teams that are kind of new this year that I'm rooting for. Some of them are just teams that I've always liked my whole life, and some of them happen to be good that I am really rooting for a lot this season. And then on the other side too, there's teams that I dislike for certain reasons this year and teams that I just have always hated, specifically as a Vikings fan and a sports fan. So I'll take you through all those just so you can get a feel for my biases. That way, even though I feel like I am pretty good with that stuff, you can call me out on some biases as the season goes along, because that's something that I don't feel like a lot of people do on podcasts, is be honest about the teams they like or dislike when they make these predictions. So we're going to start with the teams that I'm rooting for the most. And obviously the first one is the Vikings. I'm repping the Vikings. I am a diehard Vikings fan. I've always said that if I could choose between the Vikings winning the Super Bowl once or any other team win multiple times, I would pick the Vikings. I would have the Vikings win the Super Bowl once over the Wolves winning it 5 years in a row. So the Vikings are my team. I'm a diehard fan, and you can tell that I've been disappointed in the past by them because that kind of sometimes will leak into my predictions. But the other ones I think I'm pretty unbiased about, and you might call BS on a couple of them because I have some kind of high, rankings on some of these this year, but it really truly is just this year. Like, there are these teams I've laid into in the past, so just don't get me wrong there. But the Bills are one of the teams that I have loved for a long time, and you'll sense a common theme with almost 5 out of the 6 that I have on this list of the teams that I want to win the most have not won a Super Bowl before, or at least haven't won it in a very long time. So that's a common theme for the teams I root for, because as a Vikings fan, I like to live vicariously through other teams winning when the Vikings don't win. That's why I was so distraught when the Bills lost to the Chiefs in that classic divisional game a couple years back, because it was just like, man, I feel that as a Vikings fan. I've been there. And so the Bills, I just have liked them ever since I was a kid. I want to live vicariously through them. Their fan base deserves a Super Bowl more than any fan base in pro sports. And there's some pretty deserving ones on this list too, but I think the Bills are the most. They have been through a lot. 4 straight Super Bowl losses. The Vikings have also lost 4 Super Bowls and have never won one, but the Bills, 4 straight. The Bills and Chiefs are kind of on the forefront of the whole thing of donating to another team when the other team loses in the playoffs, and they just seem like all great fans. They can get a little bit overboard. It seems like that's kind of an East Coast thing sometimes, but Bills fans are great. You never see more fans gathering in a place to root on a team after they come back from a road trip than the Bills fans. Even after that just horrible loss and gut-wrenching loss to the Chiefs, all the Bills fans were still waiting at the fence to cheer on the Bills as they came home. Next one is the Chargers. This is another team that I'm hoping they're good this year, and also I have them actually pretty high on my rankings, which, if you want, I'm giving you kind of a spoiler of that video that's coming out in a few days now, but I have the Chargers higher up in the AFC than you would think. So if you disagree with that, make sure you watch that video because you'll have some things to say. But I've always loved the Chargers. Honestly, I will admit a lot of it has to do with the Chargers just being a jersey that I really like, and that design appealed to me ever since I was a kid. And sometimes that does happen where you just think something looks cool and you kind of like that team, and it becomes your third or fourth team that you like to root for just because they look cool. I just really like the Chargers, especially this year. I think it's a fun, regardless of if this team ends up being successful or not. They are just a really fun team to watch, for good or for bad. And I liked them when Philip Rivers was the quarterback. I just have always loved him. And it's just a team that I started liking for a random reason, and I just kind of grew to love as time went on. The Cincinnati Bengals, they're another team. I know it looks like I'm just rooting for the teams that are going to be good this year, but this is another team that hasn't won a Super Bowl before, so it's on my list of teams I'm trying to live vicariously through. And they're another fun team to watch this year. The main reason, though, is that I feel like this is another team and another fan base that's been through a lot. You go from even the days with the 80s and 90s when they had some really good teams those years and they weren't able to do anything with them. They've lost a couple times in the Super Bowl. They had that heartbreaking loss against the Steelers that year. There were a couple of years, I will admit, after that happened where I kind of was rooting against the Bengals just because of Burfict, and a couple of those other players that were on that team that just seemed like just really bad players and honestly bad people after what happened to Antonio Brown and the way they reacted to that. I kind of rooted against the Bengals for a couple years, but I've always been a supporter of them, and now they just happen to be more fun to watch than they were in the past. The Lions, another team that is looking like it will be better this year, and that's kind of by coincidence, but I've always wanted the Lions to do well. Obviously, this year I want the Vikings to do a little bit better than the Lions, but I still at least want to see the Lions in the playoffs, and hopefully they do that. No more unfortunate of a franchise has existed than the Lions, and just all of Detroit sports in general. They've made the playoffs like once or twice in the last 20 years, and they haven't won a Super Bowl before. So it's another team that it's tough because it's my own division, and I try to root against all the teams in my division so the Vikings can win. But I'm rooting for the Lions this year, and again, I hope the Vikings have a better season than them because I want to see the Vikings do well first and foremost. But the Lions, it would be great to see them in the playoffs or even pull off an upset. If I hope it's not against the Vikings, but if they can pull off an upset in the playoffs and move on to the next round, that would just be awesome to watch. The Dolphins, this is one where I'm rooting for them this year. I've never really been a big fan of the Dolphins. Like, I've never disliked them either, but the main reason why I'm rooting for the Dolphins this year is Tua. After the way that I've seen so many analysts rip into him for how he did this and that, or he isn't doing enough on this side or this side, he just has had an unfortunate injury history. Really want to see him do well and just prove everyone wrong because it's really obnoxious hearing all these people make excuses for, oh, he just isn't a good player. That's why he's hurt all the time. That's not how it works. Obviously, yeah, sometimes you do have to work on the whole art of falling, and sometimes there's an easier way to fall so you don't get hurt as often, and we learned that the hard way with Byron Buxton. But for the most part, it's completely out of his control, and I just really want to see him succeed because he's been through the ringer. Now on to the teams that I want to win the least. And as a Vikings fan, there's 2 or 3 of these 5 that you can probably already guess. One of them is the Packers. This is number 1 on my list, the team that I am always going to root against. It's nothing personal against the fan. I will say, people think that Vikings fans hate Packers fans, and honestly, some people might, but I think it's going a little too far because the Packers fans, if there's any Packers fans watching this, I have no problem with Packers fans. In fact, I have a lot of respect. When people were going into this offseason, they were thinking, oh man, now that Aaron Rodgers isn't in Green Bay, those family practices and those things where Lambeau used to always be packed, they're not going to be packed anymore. Well, people can still continue to show up, even though the Packers this year don't look like they're going to be as good as they have been in the past. And the Packers are one of those fan bases where I feel like they could, be coming off of a winless season, and there'd still be fans packing that place and just having a good time and supporting their team. So they're a very supportive fan base, and I have all respect for Packers fans. So don't get that twisted. It's just a thing where we have to hate the Packers. And it made it very easy to hate the Packers when Aaron Rodgers was on the team. But now that Aaron Rodgers isn't on the team, you gotta hate him. You have to just wish ill will upon the Packers and hope that they lose because it's just a thing you do. It's one of those things where you love to hate it. Like the NFL would be less fun if we had these rivalries. So I like that I get to hate the Packers. It's fun, but it just is a thing. You gotta hate them. I hate them above any other team. Next up, we have the Eagles. It's just they've been well known as a team where everyone seems to hate the fan base, and I dislike them. Not just hey listen, it's not just because the Vikings lost to them in such a heartbreaking way in 2018, and it's not just because they pounded us last year and just in general have had more success than us in the past few years. Just hey, don't think that. That's not the reason. Obviously it has some sort of. Next up, we have the Broncos, and a couple years ago, I would have had no problem against the Broncos, but as a Vikings fan and personally, Sean Payton is just one of those guys. Any team he goes on, I am immediately hoping that they have just the worst season in the history of that franchise. Sean Payton, back when he was with the Saints, he would just constantly, he made choking gestures at the Falcons. He was just so smug all the time. When the Vikings made that comeback and pulled off the Minneapolis Miracle, he was mocking the Skol chant on the sideline before all that happened. I mean, it being against the Saints made it so much. I guess I'm. Let's talk about the Saints afterwards because I guess I'm kind of lumping these two together. But Sean Payton was involved in Bountygate. I'm not saying that he had, he had to know about it. I can't think of any situation where he had no idea that this was going on. He clearly did, and that's something that I truly believe in. And I don't know, he's obnoxious. He ran his mouth about Nathaniel Hackett this offseason, which I do agree. Nathaniel Hackett's coaching job with the Broncos last year, one of the worst coaching jobs I've seen in a long time. But as a head coach of a team that you're representing, where the guy that you're talking crap about left just this offseason, he has no, that's not something you say as a coach. That's something you can say as a fan. That's not something you say as a coach. He's just classless, annoying, smug. I don't like him. So for this season and for any of the other seasons that he's with the Broncos, I'm sorry, Broncos fans. I want you to be 2-15 all those years. And then I'll talk briefly about the Saints because I kind of already talked about it. The Saints, Bountygate, all that stuff. Brett Favre throwing across his body made me really salty. There's a lot of reasons why I don't like the Saints. A lot of them had to do with Sean Payton because of all the Bountygate stuff, but just I don't like them. I will say one of my favorite recordings and one of my favorite videos in the NFL that I still watch is when the Saints kicked that field goal and they thought they won, and then it's just Alvin Kamara on the sideline like eating like M&Ms or Skittles or whatever he was eating, going ha ha, and like at the camera and just mocking, and then all the Minneapolis Miracle stuff happened after that. I love that video. That 2009 season with Bountygate was the first season that I was a Vikings fan, so it gives you an idea for just the scope of time that I've been disappointed as a Vikings fan. But Bountygate, that game was such a close game. You gotta feel like if their players hadn't been trying to intentionally hurt Brett Favre, maybe he would have ran the ball if he hadn't been hurt by those players. So that's a lot of speculating, I'm just saying. And then finally, just at the end, those are my main teams that I just really hate this year. I gotta throw in the Cowboys at the end. I mean, like, insert Stephen A. meme in right here. But it's one of those things. The thing is, I am rooting against the Cowboys. I don't necessarily hate the Cowboys. I'm rooting against the Cowboys because it is just so fun to just keep the memes going. I don't have anything personally against the Cowboys. People have said I do have a vendetta against Dak Prescott, and I just don't see that. Like I've talked about how I feel like Kirk Cousins is honestly a better quarterback than Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott has been handed all these different things, great offensive line, great wide receivers, and great defense, and has not been able to do enough with it. Like I truly believe that if Kirk had been handed the same things last season, he probably would have been able to take the Vikings at least a couple rounds through the playoffs. But all those things are not me hating the Cowboys. I never really have hated the Cowboys, but it's just so fun. The whole Stephen A stuff with him hating the Cowboys and that the conversation he has every single week and back and forth with the guys that can't remember his name, the guy that is a big Cowboys guy on First Take, but that's so fun. Just watching the entire NFL fan base besides the Cowboys just talking crap about the Cowboys all the time. It's a funny joke, and even though I don't personally dislike the Cowboys for any reason, I like to go along with it. It's just the thing you do as a sports fan and as an NFL fan. So those are the teams that I'll be rooting for the most and the least in the 2023 to 24 season for the NFL. Please let me know what your favorite and least favorite teams are in the comments. I'm sure I'll get a comment saying the Vikings are their least favorite team, and that's okay. I hate the Packers too, but it's really nothing. It's just as simple as either the team that I'm a fan of or some random reasons of why I dislike or like these teams. But I felt like it was only fair that you knew where potential biases were, even though, like I said, I still like to say that I feel really like I do a good job of being unbiased on this channel. But there you go. Thank you so much for watching this video. Again, make sure you tune into my live stream where I'm going to be talking about all things Chiefs and Lions on September 7th. It'll be a 6 to 7 p.m. Central Standard Time stream. So make sure you tune in for that. I can't wait to get the season started. Even with it being less than 2 weeks away, it still feels like it's taking too long. But thanks again so much. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the flip side.